There's a sacrificial element in maturation, right? You have to sacrifice the plural potentiality of childhood for the actuality of a frame. And the question is, well, why would you do that? Well, one reason is it happens to you whether you do it or not. You can either choose your damn limitation, or you can let it take you unaware when you're 30, or even worse when you're 40, and then that is not a happy day. The Puer Eternus is a Latin term meaning eternal child. This psychological phenomenon is shaped by the family, which usually happens through an overprotective mother and an absent father. Nowadays, this has happened due to the high divorce rates and the abandonment of the child by the father. This is imposed by a mother who has her son as her whole world, doing everything she can to keep him from being hurt. Meanwhile, the father's abstinence makes the man weak, docile, and with a low level of masculinity. Marie-Louise von Franz, a Swiss psychologist, noticed a worrying trend around 1950. Many people, even as adults, still had the mind of someone younger. They looked and acted like adults, but their way of thinking and acting didn't match their grown-up bodies. For von Franz, this problem was so important that in 1959, she gave a series of lectures on what she called the psychology of the Peur Eternus. This term originally referred to a young god called Bacchus in mythology, who never grows old. Psychologist Carl Jung, who was his teacher, used the term to describe those people who, like the character Peter Pan, never really become adults. So much so that one of the most striking parts is when Peter Pan sacrifices the chance to have a real relationship with a woman, Wendy. But Peter Pan doesn't want to accept the responsibilities of someone grown up and mature, so he settles for Tinkerbell, fairy who doesn't exist, as a substitute for a real woman. This can be related to modern polygamy and the abuse of pornography. In one of his lectures, von Franz explained that the Peur Eternus is the person who gets stuck in the typical characteristics of an adolescent. All the things that are normal in someone aged 17 or 18 continue to appear when that person is an adult, which often includes a very strong dependence on the mother. Von Franz believed that over the years, what called the Peur Eternus problem would spread and affect more people around the world. Predictions were surprisingly correct, especially among young men in Western countries. Many of them face problems at school, in their social life, in their spirituality, at work, and even in their relationships. It's common for them to continue living with their parents into their 20s or 30s, preferring the comfort of home to the challenge of seeking independence. It's easy to be a naive idealist. It's easy to be a cynical realist. It's quite another thing to have no illusions and still hold the inner flame. Many men who suffer from the Peur Eternus syndrome engage in activities that have no direct contribution or impact on their gradual process of self-development. For example, refusing to leave home to live alone in another city or country, preferring to spend a lot of time indoors playing video games, or watching too much pornography, living a sedentary routine or not cultivating personal skills, and reluctance to participate in social activities are all factors that keep the man stuck in the comfort of his former childhood conditions. These attitudes end up pushing him further away from the process of individuation. All this for quick pleasure and the escape from suffering. Therefore, the more you get involved and lost in this modern world, full of physical and mental comforts that offer instant and degenerative gratification, easily accessible with a simple touch of the cell phone, the more you protect yourself from the steps necessary to eventually become an independent man. This is why many end up becoming weak, shy, cowardly, and with feminine attitudes, characteristics that don't attract women because they can't trust you to lead, protect, and provide, since you lack the attitudes and abilities of a truly mature man. In a way, the Peur Eternus prefers to be pure potential. He convinces himself that he could be anything he wants, but he doesn't actively work towards actually being something. He just consoles himself with the idea that he could be anything he wants. This is because when we start working towards something, we start to feel our weight in the world. We are measured and classified, we are quantified, and we become real. And this real reality is often less pleasurable to live than our ideal fantasy. But it is real, not a fantasy. And reality can be improved, but a fantasy life always ends in tragedy. Cultures, lifestyles, social interaction, and activities that do not promote self-sufficiency can also strongly influence a man's decision to live independently. The absence or lack of rites of passage, whether carried out individually or collectively by the people around him, such as friends and colleagues who discourage and criticize him when he tries to take risks or explore new ventures, also have an impact on this process. They become very philosophical. And this happens also to older men or women who lack of feeling, sometimes who lack grounding in the world. Where does the life energy therefore go? It goes upward into the head, into very lofty ideas of spiritual awakening and enlightenment, or oneness, into concepts of world salvation. And these are the energy that is flooding into the fantasies about reaching certain ideals. In most cultures throughout history, young people passed from adolescence to adulthood with the help of initiation rituals. The main aim of these rituals in all cultures was to distance the young person from their mother, first physically and then mentally. These rituals usually took place shortly after the onset of puberty and were organized exclusively by the oldest men in the tribe. In many cases, women were not allowed to attend or participate in these rituals. One example of an initiation rite, as Mircea Eliade explains in his book Rites and Symbols of Initiation, took place as follows. In the middle of the night, the tribe's cultural fathers, dressed as gods or demons, took the young man out of his bed. It was the last time he would see his mother, sometimes for several months. They would take him to a dark cave, bury him alive, or leave him somewhere where he would be surrounded by darkness in a real or symbolic way. This stage represented a symbolic death of the young man's childhood, where he left behind paradise and the joys of being carefree. The message to the young man was clear. He could no longer go back to his old life with his mother. After this symbolic death of childhood, a ceremony took place that symbolized the rebirth of the young man, now as an adult. The older men would then teach him and send him into the desert, where he would spend many months struggling to survive. When he returned, he was received by the tribe as an adult member, and from that moment on, the young man was expected to have overcome his dependence on his mother. Immaturity and dependence were no longer acceptable. Given how intense and sometimes even violent these rituals could be, it seems that our ancestors understood that separating the young man from his mother was a difficult task that required very planned measures. Children also need to see their parents at work in the world. They need them to show them how to act in different situations, how to work, how to overcome difficulties. They need an activation of their natural masculinity, both through practical examples and direct guidance. Psychotherapist James Hollis, in his book Under the Shadow of Saturn, mentions a major study which found that only 17% of American men said they had had a positive relationship with their father during their youth. In most cases, the father was absent, either physically or emotionally. Reflecting on this statistic, James Hollis writes, "If this astonishing statistic even comes close to the truth, something great and tragic has happened to one of nature's critical balances. It's not surprising that the man-child problem occupies such a prominent place in our age." Then the first thing that she does when he leaves is bribe Cartman, basically out of doing his homework so that he can accompany her to, I don't know, fast food restaurant or something like that. And so the reason she does that is because she's lonesome and doesn't have anybody else around. And, maybe she's also deeply, deeply, deeply terrified that if she helps that boy grow up, he will leave and she'll have nothing. And so mothers who don't have something say outside their infants, not merely their children, are more likely to fall into that. And it's no wonder, you've got to think that through. When the father is absent, it affects not only the child, but also the mother in a way that can make matters worse. Firstly, the mother tends to be even more present in the upbringing, trying to compensate for the lack of a father figure in her child's life. In addition, the absence of the father's love and support makes the mother feel an emotional lack, which she tries to fill through her relationship with her child. This situation can create what psychologists call a devouring mother. This means that the mother, afraid of losing her child, begins to protect him too much, to control everything he does, and to be present in every aspect of his life. Often, even without realizing it, this mother, who has the best of intentions, ends up making her child dependent on her, even when he is an adult. Reflecting on the secret bond between mother and child and how it prevents both from facing life, Carl Jung writes, "A child brought up in this way, who has never had the chance to venture out on his own, to support himself, to make mistakes and learn from his own mistakes, or to make decisions on his own, will end up becoming an adult who cannot face and overcome life's challenges. The healthy desire to adapt to the world and become an independent person which involves facing fears, pain, and conflicts, will be replaced by the desire to remain dependent on the mother, be it the real mother or a figure that represents her. In The Matrix, the main character, Neo, is given the choice between a red pill and a blue pill. The blue pill allows him to remain content and comfortable in a simulated reality. It's the idea that ignorance is bliss. This pill makes him choose the accepted path of his mother's overprotection. The red pill, on the other hand, allows him to face the harsh truth of reality and embark on a journey of self-knowledge. This pill makes him choose the path of overprotecting his mother, going to the other extreme and seeking to become the father figure he hasn't had in his life. The pure will usually choose the blue pill. In other words, when a young person reaches adulthood with a great deal of maternal dependence, they won't want to seek their independence or develop their own consciousness. Instead, he will be seized by what Jung called a spirit of regression, something that keeps him tied to his mother and prevents him from growing, leading him to lose his own identity. Basically, this means that the mother provides everything for him as long as he doesn't get out from under her wing. He dams up his inner life. In actuality, for instance, he gets up at 10:30 a.m. He hangs around till lunchtime with a cigarette in his mouth, giving way to his emotions and fantasies. In the afternoon, he means to do some work, but first goes out with his friends and then with a girl. And the evening is spent in a long discussion about the meaning of life. He then goes to bed at 1 a.m. and the next day is a repetition of the one before. And in that way, the capacity for life and the inner riches are wasted, for they cannot get into something meaningful, but slowly overgrow the real personality so that the individual walks about in a cloud of fantasies. Fantasies which, in themselves, are interesting and full of rich possibilities, full of unlived life. Now, it's very important that you don't put all your anger and resentment on your parents, because they also have their own problems. Unfortunately, we end up getting involved or stuck in the middle of them. And, although they have contributed a lot to our misfortunes during adulthood, most of the time it hasn't been completely consciously and intentionally. As we know, our parents often only want the best for us, even if the methods they used to raise us were shaped by their own good or bad childhood experiences under the care of our grandparents. Misfortunes are inevitable sooner or later, and I understand that a lot of our anger comes from the fact that we wasted much of our youth believing that living in our comfort zone was the best way forward, and that we ended up missing the chance to really live life by taking risks. So we often have to face difficult circumstances without much experience, and the worst thing is that, in historical and technical terms, we are not entirely responsible for this. However, we have no choice but to face and overcome these challenges so that we can one day be free and make our future better than our past. Taking full responsibility for our lives, regardless of the circumstances, is the only way to move forward and leave the past behind, because, once again, no one will come to save us. And as much as you'd like to blame your parents and hope for some kind of redemption from them to brighten up your present and future circumstances, they're already too old and tired for that, no matter how desperately they want it. So forgive them, because as much as they have caused you difficulties, without them, you wouldn't be here. If you feel reluctant to forgive them for what you've become, think that what you blame is what you give power to. So if you're pointing the finger at them saying that they're to blame for how you are, guess what? You're giving them all the power and taking it away from your own life. And in the worst case scenario, even if it is their fault and you prove it, your life doesn't change at all. It's just an excuse to put your head on the pillow and think you're right. But being right doesn't change your circumstances. What's more, one of the reasons your parents want you to keep this dreamer child alive is that even though it's constructive for responsibility, it's fundamental for dreaming and maintaining a balance between obligations and future aspirations. Jung spoke about this very well, he emphasized. True maturity lies not in abandoning the inner child, but integrating its wonder and creativity into adulthood. By balancing these qualities of youth with the realities of life, we enrich our journey and prevent the inner child from becoming a source of suffering.